Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming, and I also would like to add to the thanks so far to all of those who organized this wonderful conference, who invited me and enabled me to be here today. Thank you very much. And I'm here to talk to you about America's new evangelicals, those who have left the right. The subtitle of this conference is Tradition and Modernism in Conflict, so it may disappoint some of you that I will be speaking about a tradition that is not in conflict with modernism. The tradition is American evangelicalism, which, though now associated with conservatism, was a creative and progressive force in American culture from the colonial era through World War I. That progressivism, in fact, is its tradition, which has shown again its generative capacities in the recent shift away from the religious right. Let's see. Hey, to be sure, the fact that 79% of white evangelicals voted for Mitt Romney in the recent election got little attention in the news because most people thought it wasn't news. For the last 40 years, white evangelicals have been a Republican bloc. Some of them have been taken to be even a threat to modernity and democracy. On one hand, they have been associated with the proto-theocratic efforts to impose their interpretation of Scripture on the body politic. And on the other hand, paradoxical to this heavy use of the state, they have been associated with neoliberal economics and Tea Party-style small government. In short, evangelicalism has seemed a hybrid of fundamentalist government, fundamentalist neoliberalism, and fundamentalist intolerance. Yet, while painting all evangelicals as one flock of religio-political lemmings was never accurate, it is less so today. Where there was even the appearance of a monovocal evangelical movement, there is now robust polyphony. Current shifts in evangelical activism have rerouted the flow of money, time, energy, and expertise. Just for some basics, evangelicalism is an approach to Protestantism. It is not a denomination. Its central features include the search for an inner personal relationship with Jesus, the mission to bring others to this sort of relationship, the cross as a symbol not only of salvation but of service to others, individual acceptance of Jesus' gift of redemption, individualist Bible reading by ordinary men and women, and the priesthood of all believers, independent of ecclesiastical or state authorities. Its emphasis on individual conscience made evangelicalism anti-authoritarian, economically populist, anti-banker, anti-landlord, and highly active on behalf of the common man, which allowed it to be one of America's most energetic society builders. I'll give you one example. The largest US government operation in antebellum America before the Civil War was the Postal Service. But by 1850, evangelical churches had double the employees, twice as many facilities, and raised 3 times as much money for their social service projects. Twice in the last century, as you know, evangelicals turned towards conservatism, the second time forming the New Right coalition with the Republican Party. This held until about 2004. But in the second term of George W. Bush, many evangelicals, while holding to their theological beliefs, or perhaps because they held to their theological beliefs, began to question their previous right-wing activism. Across geographic and demographic groups, evangelicals left the right, moving towards an anti-militarist, anti-consumerist focus on poverty relief, environmental protection, immigration reform, and racial religious reconciliation. In 2005, Christianity Today wrote, George W. Bush is not the Lord. The American flag is not the cross. The Pledge of Allegiance is not the creed. And God Bless America is not doxology. In 2006, the Evangelical Environmental Network launched its What Would Jesus Drive campaign for greater fuel efficiency. In 2007, the National Association of Evangelicals issued its Evangelical Declaration Against Torture. Since 2009, that was opposing the Bush administration very forcefully from one of a bloc that was associated with the Bush administration. Since 2009, the National Association of Evangelicals has repeatedly protested against Republican budget cuts for the needy, writing, quote, "This is the wrong place to cut," close quote. New evangelicals are neither small nor elite. By 2004, devout Christians whose views and activism differ from those of the religious right came to 24% of the US population. If you subtract Catholics, about 6%, you have 19% of devout Protestants who do not identify with the religious right. There were, I think, 4 reasons for this shift in political ethics and activism. The first is generational, with idealistic younger evangelicals rejecting the in-groupism and consumerism, prosperity gospel of their parents. Second are recent changes among all evangelicals, attitudinal shifts about the environment, global connectedness, poverty, have proceeded not at the radical fringes of American society, but right there in Middle America, and priorities there, including among evangelicals, have changed. Third is ethics, in a group that takes ethics very seriously. The militarism and torture of the Bush years, as well as the consumerism and in-groupism of the last 40 years, prodded many evangelicals to self-examination. For instance, in their book, Unchristian, that is the title, Unchristian, evangelicals David Kinnaman and Gabe Lyons titled their chapters, Hypocritical, Sheltered, Too Political, Judgmental, and Anti-Homosexual, giving you some idea of the self-critique that began. A fourth reason for the shift in ethics, political ethics, was the deprofessionalization of social service work, as ordinary Christians began in increasing numbers to live and serve among the poor and in the US and abroad. Their priorities started to shift towards economic justice and environmental protection. Of course, no grassroots movement, which is what I'm describing, involving millions of people, will have one policy or position. But new evangelical concerns collect in a few areas. One is church-state separation and constitutional law neutral to religion to ensure fair government and religious freedom for all. Quote, "We are firmly opposed to the imposition of theocracy on our pluralistic society. Thus, every right that we assert for ourselves is at once a right we defend for others. A right for a Christian is a right for a Jew, a right for a secularist, a right for a Mormon, a right for a Muslim, and all the believers of all faiths across this wide land," close quote. This is from the Evangelical Manifesto of 2008, signed by over 70 leaders of American evangelical institutions, including the National Association of Evangelicals and the president of the Theological Seminary in Dallas, Texas. The second area of prime concern among evangelicals not in the religious right is self-identification as a critic of politics when they believe those politics are unjust. This is the prophetic role of the church, not to be government, but to, quote, "speak truth to power," close quote. It was, for example, a key motive in America's civil rights movement, which was spearheaded by the churches. It was a key motive in anti-war protests, and now it's a key motive in evangelical support for environmental protection, economic justice, and immigration reform. Key to being able to criticize the government is party independence, of course, as one cannot easily critique the government if one is dependent on it. In 2006, Frank Page, then president of the conservative Southern Baptist Convention, warned, quote, "I have cautioned our denomination to be very careful as not to be seen in lockstep with any political party," close quote. The National Association of Evangelicals' willingness to criticize George W. Bush on torture and to criticize the Republican Party on cutting funds for the needy are other examples. In 2008, the Evangelical Manifesto called on evangelicals to distance themselves from party politics, lest, and I quote, "Christians become useful idiots for one political party or another," close quote. A third feature of New Evangelicalism is self-identification as civil society actors, neither state actors nor bubble communities, Parallelgesellschaft. And these civil society actors advocate for their positions through public education, lobbying, coalition building, negotiation, etc. Indeed, new evangelicals are often more engaged than other citizens in the social, economic, and charitable spheres of American life through the programs they develop and run largely by volunteers who raise much of the funds as well. As one pastor said to me in my field research, quote, "If healing the brokenhearted, setting the captives free, and ministering to the poor was Jesus' job description, then we believe it is ours as well." Interestingly, most evangelicals aged 18 to 30 are not only engaged in social service work, but fully 65% favor more governmental social service provisions such as Obama's new health care plan. It is important to note that new evangelical economic programs do not take the form just of almsgiving or charity, but of foundational resource distribution and the restructuring of opportunity of education, healthcare, job, training. They do this in three ways. One within the church. An example would be the over 200,000 Christians who contribute to a pool that covers members' medical benefits. The second way, evangelicals also alter their own business practices towards economic justice. An example would be the Pasco, Washington fruit farmer who built for her employees a residential community and set up English as a second language, high school equivalency and computer courses, youth programs, counseling services, a preschool, an elementary school, and a college scholarship program. A third way, whoops, I think I'm on the wrong one. There we go. There we go. A third way of restructuring opportunity is, of course, new evangelicals use their money to develop and redistribute resources in less developed regions. Examples would be the educational, substance abuse, prison, environmental protection, and microcredit programs that are run both by large organizations like World Vision, which supports 440,000 projects in 46 developing countries, or by, for example, one church in my study which spends $1.5 million a year on economic justice and aid programs, or another that raised $66,000 to build a training center in Zambia, etc. Important to note is that in their overseas endeavors, new evangelicals are developing a very nuanced critique of what used to be known as the Bibles for Bacon school of evangelizing, where participation in religious activities was a condition of AIDS. Many of the evangelicals that I spoke to found this unacceptable because it is un-Jesus-like. As one told me, Jesus served. He did not ask people to sign on the bottom line. I'd now like to turn to new evangelical positions on abortion and homosexuality. By 2007, 40% of evangelicals and 63% under 30 held that homosexuality should be accepted by society. 2/3 of younger evangelicals said they did not find homosexuality a problem. New evangelicals oppose discrimination against homosexuals in housing, education, and non-religious employment because they note, while some consider homosexuality a sin, a matter between man and God, democracies do not punish people for sins, which after all vary from faith to faith. The state does not, moreover, rescind political or economic rights for commission of other sins, such as heterosexual adultery. They also note that judging the sins of others is unchristian. Just last year, the New Evangelical Partnership for the Common Good, in coalition with the Catholic senior diplomat at the Institute of World Politics, together wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post protesting Uganda's draconian anti-gay legislation. I'd like to quote a piece, quote, "Any effort, quote, to persecute people for their sexual orientation or gender identity offends intrinsic human dignity and violates Jesus' commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves." The entire Judeo-Christian worldview is built on this unshakable foundation. While 74% of white evangelicals oppose gay marriage, opposition to civil unions is greatly decreasing. At 57% at 2009, 41% of those evangelicals attending church less frequently than once a week. Gay student groups are emerging across evangelical colleges. Belmont University amended its anti-discrimination policy in 2011 to include homosexuals and recognized its first gay organization. I'm going to move, in light of the time, along to abortion. 61% of evangelicals today believe abortion should be illegal in all or most cases, meaning that 33% think it should be legal. 84% of evangelicals ages 18 to 30 say they would not consider an abortion if they were faced with an unexpected pregnancy. Yet, 86 also find contraception morally acceptable, and they are aware of what I call facts on the ground. 44% of unmarried evangelicals acknowledge being sexually active, 25% recently so. 82% hold that those having sex outside of marriage should use contraceptives to prevent pregnancy. More importantly, noting that 73% of abortions in the United States are economically motivated, new evangelicals aim at providing accessible, realistic alternatives, including medical, financial, and emotional support during pregnancy, along with daycare and job training postpartum where needed. I think this is tremendously important as I went around the country to notice that how many evangelical churches were actually providing an alternative to abortion rather than simply lambasting women who choose it. Given evangelical activism in economic justice, environmental protection, and immigration reform, what retains the evangelical vote for the Republican Party, whose politics are often at odds with these positions? In part, it's the opposition to abortion. But in greater part, the vote for the Republican Party is a vote for small government. Quote, "The largest divides between committed supporters of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney are over the scope and role of government in the economic realm." Close quote. It is a preference for small government that evangelicals came through doctrine and history. The Protestant, especially evangelical, emphasis on self-responsibility in striving for moral uplift yielded a powerful belief in individual and community independence. This belief in independence originally meant your self-responsibility in striving towards the divine. But striving, culturally speaking, became a muscle well exercised and applied to many arenas of life, to the political and to the economic. Do-it-yourself moral uplift served as a precedent and model for do-it-yourself uplift across the board, in contrast to relying on authorities or central government. This idea, available to all Protestants, was underscored for dissenting Protestants, which evangelicals were, who were determinedly self-reliant to survive against the oppression and marginalization by Europe's state and state churches. That is mostly how they got from Europe to the United States. From the colonial period through the next 300 years, self-responsible striving and the dissenters' suspicion of authorities interacted synergistically with the rough nature of American settlement, where one had to rely on oneself because there were few authorities or state to help you along. Survival depended on community and individual effort. The result is that the American political imaginary is one of voluntary associationism and suspicion of the state. In spite of the recession, support for government aid to the needy is down 18 points since 2007, and for evangelicals, even more so. This is not to say that government in the United States has done little towards national development. It did a great deal in land grants, canal building, road building, etc. But many Americans and evangelicals, because of the history of self-reliance and independence, believe it did less than it did and should do less, as government is too corrupt and too incompetent to do anything right, but just big enough to be able to take away your rights. Given this history and cultural perspective, it is remarkable that nearly a quarter of white evangelicals voted for Obama in 2012. In 2008, a third of white evangelicals under the age of 40 voted Democrat. That's not a youth vote, that's under 40. 26% of older white evangelicals voted for Obama, and 36% of those attending church less frequently than once a week. Evangelical political action committees like the Matthew 25 network formed to support Obama, and two evangelical ministers helped to write the 2008 Democratic Party platform. I do not think, in closing, that this signals a mass turn to the Democratic Party, owing to opposition to abortion, but more fundamentally, owing to the preference for small government. But the 65% of young evangelicals under 30 who favor more government, social services, raises questions about evangelical politics in the future. I would like to close with a final irony. White evangelicals, owing to their wariness of government, are often seen as unmodern and unequipped to deal with global economies, technology, migration, climatic effects, and disease. Yet, in fact, because of their extensive social service work, evangelicals are often highly sophisticated about these issues. I think it's also worth noting that new evangelicals do not call only for smaller government. They call for our robust civil society development. They call not only for an absence of government, but for our energetic presence to address the issues of the day. And they can hold to this ethic under very difficult conditions in the developing world and over very long periods of time, because they have a transcendent, a covenant between man and God that for them means acting covenantally between oneself and one's neighbor. And this covenant cannot be abrogated or tweaked to suit one's local temptations. Thank you for listening.